Day 0, Hour 0. The collapse began not with a bang, but with silence. At 3:47 UTC on a Tuesday morning in September, the global internet infrastructure experienced what would later be termed a cascading protocol failure, a term as sterile as it was inadequate to describe the unraveling of the world's central nervous system. The cause would be debated for decades: a coordinated cyber attack, solar electromagnetic interference, a critical flaw in core routing protocols, or perhaps an unfortunate confluence of all three. The cause, in the end, mattered less than the consequence. Within 90 seconds, 73% of the world's bordered gateway protocol routes collapsed. Think of BGP as the postal service of the internet, the invisible infrastructure that ensures data packets find their destination. When it failed, the digital world became an archipelago of isolated islands. Each island unable to communicate with the next. The internet did not simply slow, it ceased to exist as a unified entity. To understand the magnitude, consider this. In the year preceding the collapse, the digital economy contributed $4.9 trillion to global economic output, representing 18% of worldwide GDP. This was not abstract value. This was the Amazon warehouse that knew precisely which products to stock. This was the just-in-time manufacturing system that ordered components hours before assembly. This was the financial clearinghouse that settled $6.6 trillion in transactions daily. This was the grid control system that balanced electricity supply and demand across continents in real time. When the CrowdStrike software failure occurred in July 2024, causing a mere 78-minute global IT disruption, the economic damage reached $10 billion. That incident affected a fraction of systems and was resolved within hours. Our scenario involved total collapse with no resolution timeline. The mathematics were unforgiving. If 78 minutes cost $10 billion, what would permanent silence cost? Chapter 2, The First Ripple, Day 0, Hour 1 to Hour 24. The first casualty of the silence was trust. Within the first hour, as data centers worldwide lost connectivity and engineers scrambled to diagnose the problem, a terrible realization spread through the global financial system. No one could verify anything. The New York Stock Exchange halted trading at 9:31 a.m. Eastern Time, 1 minute after opening. London had already suspended operations. Tokyo never opened. The problem was not that computers had failed. Most still functioned locally. The problem was that a stock exchange is fundamentally an exercise in synchronized record-keeping. Without internet connectivity to verify trades, match buyers with sellers, and coordinate with clearinghouses, the exchanges became useless. It was as if every participant in a poker game suddenly spoke a different language. By hour 6, the global financial system had frozen $87 trillion in assets. Every stock, every bond, every derivative that required electronic trading. The numbers on Bloomberg terminals and Fidelity apps had become archaeological artifacts. They showed yesterday's prices frozen in amber, while the real value of assets fluctuated in an invisible dimension no one could access. The banking system followed within hours. Modern banking is a confidence game, performed through electronic communication. When you swipe your credit card, your bank must verify in real time that thou hast funds, the merchant is legitimate, and the transaction hath not been duplicated. Without internet connectivity, banks reverted to what they called stand-in processing, approving transactions based on recent patterns and hoping to reconcile later. But there would be no later. By hour 12, major banks globally suspended card transactions entirely. ATMs, those monuments to automated convenience, became expensive decor. Historical parallel. During the 2008 financial crisis, the global banking system nearly collapsed when trust evaporated and banks refused to lend to one another. The Federal Reserve and other central banks had to inject $29 trillion in emergency liquidity over several years to prevent total systemic failure. In our scenario, there was no mechanism to inject liquidity. The communication channels for such intervention had ceased to exist. Day 0, hour 12. The supply chain impacts manifested with cruel speed. Modern logistics operates on information, not inventory. Walmart's distribution system, often cited as a marvel of efficiency, maintained only 3 days of inventory in its stores. The company's servers knew precisely which trucks to dispatch, carrying which products to which stores at which times. With that digital omniscience severed, the trucks stopped moving, not because fuel was unavailable, though that would soon become a problem, but because no one knew where to send them. Consider the complexity. A single pallet of goods in a modern distribution center might contain components from 17 countries, assembled according to algorithms that optimized for cost, speed, and carbon footprint. The warehouse management system tracked every item with RFID tags and barcodes, updating inventory in real time. When the internet died, so did that omniscience. Warehouse workers found themselves staring at millions of items, with no way to know what was inside most packages, who ordered them, or where they should go. By hour 18, panic buying had begun. Humans, sensing disruption, reverted to hoarding behavior. Grocery stores in major cities reported shelves emptying of bottled water, canned goods, and batteries. The irony was exquisite. The initial wave of shortages was created not by actual scarcity, but by the fear of future scarcity. Yet that fear was rational. The supply chain disruption was real and would only deepen. Day 0, hour 24. As the first day ended, governments worldwide scrambled to respond. Emergency broadcasts went out over radio, one of the few mass communication systems still functioning. Presidents and prime ministers urged calm, promised solutions, and invoked emergency powers. But their words rang hollow, because even governments had lost the ability to coordinate. The intricate web of federal, state, and local communications that handled everything from social security payments to military logistics had disintegrated. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, designed to cushion oil supply shocks, couldn't be accessed effectively, because the distribution coordination systems were internet-dependent. The Federal Reserve couldn't inject liquidity into banks because the electronic fund transfer systems were offline. FEMA couldn't deploy resources efficiently because its logistics software couldn't communicate with state emergency management systems. In this first day, approximately 2.3 trillion in global economic value had effectively vanished, not destroyed, but frozen in inaccessible form. That figure, staggering as it was, would prove to be merely the beginning. The initial shock was electromagnetic. The sustained damage would be biological, as the economic organism realized it could no longer coordinate its own metabolism. Chapter 3. The System Shock, Week 1. The second week exposed the true horror. The collapse was not a temporary disruption, but a systemic transformation. Engineers worldwide worked frantically to restore connectivity, but they faced an insurmountable problem. The Internet's architecture assumed basic connectivity existed. Restoring it from absolute zero across continents without the ability to coordinate remotely was like trying to perform surgery while blind and paralyzed. The cascading effects were medieval in their inexorability. No electricity meant no refrigeration. Supermarkets across the developed world watched as their cold storage units became tombs for food. The United States alone wasted approximately 127 million tons of food annually, even under normal conditions. Now, the waste accelerated catastrophically as entire supply chains rotted simultaneously. The smell of decay became the olfactory signature of urban collapse. We have built a civilization so sophisticated that it requires constant digital communication to function, yet so fragile that it cannot survive without it. This is not strength. This is dependency wearing a mask of advancement. Anonymous Grid Operator, Day 9, Week 2. By the second week, the economic measurements themselves had become uncertain. How does one calculate GDP when half the economy cannot engage in transactions? The traditional economic indicators, unemployment rates, inflation metrics, consumer confidence indices, all depended on data collection systems that no longer functioned. Economists found themselves in the peculiar position of navigating a hurricane without instruments, feeling the wind, but unable to quantify it. What we know, reconstructed from paper records and local accounts, was this: approximately 37% of the global workforce found themselves unable to work. Not unemployed in the traditional sense, their jobs still theoretically existed, but unable to perform them without digital tools. Software developers couldn't access code repositories. Accountants couldn't access financial records. Teachers couldn't access lesson plans or student records. The knowledge economy, that great achievement of late capitalism, had been memory holed. The remaining 63% who could still work faced a different nightmare. They couldn't be paid. Payroll systems were digital. Direct deposit required internet connectivity. Even paper checks required electronic clearing. Companies that maintained emergency cash reserves began paying workers in physical currency, but these reserves were finite and, more critically, difficult to replenish. Banks, still effectively offline, couldn't provide currency in sufficient quantities. Barter systems emerged spontaneously. A mechanic traded auto repairs for groceries. A doctor treated patients in exchange for firewood. A teacher tutored children for dried goods. This return to gift economy might have seemed quaint, even romantic, in other circumstances. But these exchanges operated at a tiny fraction of the efficiency of the monetary system they replaced. Economic output plummeted, not because people stopped working. Quantification attempt. Research has shown that a 10% increase in internet connectivity correlates with a 1.38% increase in global GDP growth. Extrapolating inversely, a crude but necessary approximation, the complete loss of internet connectivity implied an immediate GDP contraction of approximately 13.8%. But this linear model proved wildly optimistic. The actual contraction accelerated non-linearly as secondary and tertiary effects cascaded through the system. Week 3, the third week, brought the medicine shortage. Pharmaceutical supply chains represented perhaps the most complex logistical achievement in human history. A single pill might contain active ingredients manufactured in India from precursor chemicals synthesized in China, using raw materials extracted in Australia, formulated in Ireland, packaged in Puerto Rico, and distributed globally via a network of temperature-controlled warehouses and delivery systems. This supply chain depended entirely on digital coordination. When that coordination vanished, so did the medicine. Hospitals watched their inventories dwindle. Insulin, antibiotics, blood pressure medications, psychiatric drugs, chemotherapy agents. Each missing drug represented not just a medical emergency, but cascading emergencies as conditions worsened without treatment. Diabetics, particularly type 1 diabetics dependent on insulin, faced an immediate existential threat. The United States alone had approximately 1.9 million type 1 diabetics. Most maintained perhaps a 2-week supply of insulin, refrigerated. As electricity became unreliable and supplies ran low, a medieval specter returned. People dying of treatable conditions because the treatment couldn't reach them. Month 1, end of week 4. As the first month concluded, economists attempting to reconstruct the damage estimated that global GDP had contracted by approximately 28% in 30 days. To contextualize this number, during the Great Depression, US GDP contracted 30% over 4 years. During the 2008 financial crisis, global GDP declined roughly 2%. The month of silence had compressed years of economic destruction into weeks. But raw GDP figures obscured the more profound transformation. GDP measures economic activity, but it says nothing about distribution or access. In the first month, global economic activity had not merely declined, it had fragmented. The world economy was no longer a single integrated system, but thousands of local economies, each isolated, each struggling to meet basic needs with local resources. Cities, those monuments to specialization and trade, revealed their vulnerability. Urban populations couldn't grow food. They depended on supply chains that no longer functioned. In New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai, the great metropolises of the digital age, food riots began by day 25. Not because global food production had collapsed, but because the logistics system that connected farms to cities had disintegrated. Rural areas fared marginally better, but only marginally. Modern farms, despite their pastoral appearance, were highly mechanized operations, dependent on GPS-guided tractors, internet-connected sensors, and digital markets to sell their output. A Kansas wheat farmer might harvest grain successfully, but without digital commodity markets to coordinate buyers, without internet-connected grain elevators to manage storage, the wheat rotted in silos while cities starved. Chapter 4. The Inflationary Spiral, Months 2-3. The second and third months witnessed the emergence of a phenomenon economists had studied primarily in history books: genuine hyperinflation. Not the modest 3 to 4% annual inflation of normal times, nor even the 8 to 10% inflation considered severe in developed economies. We speak of Weimar Germany in 1923, when $1 was worth 4.2 trillion marks by November. The mechanism was grimly simple. Governments, faced with collapse, did what governments always do in extremis. They printed money. But this time, the money printing occurred without the usual constraints. Central banks couldn't coordinate policy internationally. They couldn't even gauge the money supply accurately within their own borders because the electronic tracking systems were offline. It was monetary policy in the dark. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, all resorted to physical currency creation on unprecedented scales. Helicopter money became literal. In some regions, currency was actually dropped from helicopters because ground distribution networks had collapsed. The intention was to provide liquidity, to keep some economic activity alive. The result was to destroy the currency itself. By month 2, prices had become theoretical constructs. A loaf of bread that cost $3 in the pre-collapse world might be $30 or $300, or might not be available at any price. But even these numbers were misleading because they assumed stable currency. In reality, people had stopped using currency entirely in many transactions, reverting to barter or local scrip systems. Historical echo. In Weimar Germany, the hyperinflation began gradually after World War I, accelerated by 1921, and reached its crescendo in 1923. Workers demanded payment twice daily so they could buy goods before prices doubled again. People carried money in wheelbarrows. The social trauma of this economic violence rippled for decades, eventually contributing to the rise of fascism. Our scenario compressed a similar trajectory into months rather than years. Month 3, the third month, marked the emergence of what historians would later call the authentication crisis. Modern economy is built on trust, and trust is built on verification. When you buy something with a credit card, multiple systems verify your identity, your available credit, and the legitimacy of the merchant. When you receive a paycheck, systems verify your employment, calculate taxes, and transfer funds. All of this verification was digital. Without verification systems, fraud exploded. Counterfeit currency flooded markets. Not sophisticated counterfeits, but crude ones. Because who could verify authenticity? Property records, maintained digitally, became contestable. Who owned which house? The deed was on a server somewhere, inaccessible. Title companies had backups, perhaps, but even accessing those backups required electricity and operational computers. Contracts became unenforceable, not because courts had disappeared, though many court systems struggled, but because evidence had become digital and inaccessible. A company that owed another company $10 million could simply deny the debt. "Prove it," they said. "Show me the contract, the invoice, the wire transfer confirmation." All digital, all inaccessible. The resulting breakdown in contract enforcement represented a regression to pre-modern economic relations. Trade requires trust or enforcement. With digital verification gone and enforcement systems overwhelmed, trade contracted further. Companies that could function refused to do business with unknowns. Supply chains shortened dramatically as businesses dealt only with geographically close partners they could physically verify. Month 4. By the 4th month, the refugee crisis had begun in earnest. Cities, unable to feed their populations, began hemorrhaging residents. The great urban centers, built during an age of abundant energy and global supply chains, proved unsustainable without them. Estimates suggest that between 200 and 300 million people relocated in these months, the largest human migration in history. They moved toward rural areas, toward perceived food security, toward anywhere that seemed more sustainable than the decaying cities. But this migration solved nothing and exacerbated many problems. Rural areas, sized for their existing populations, couldn't absorb millions of urbanites. Conflicts over resources, land, water, food, escalated from arguments to violence. Governments attempted to organize the migration, to coordinate refugee camps and distribution of resources. Some succeeded better than others, but even successful efforts were hampered by the fundamental coordination problem. How do you organize millions of people without digital communication systems? Chapter 5. The die-off months, 5 to 6. The historian must approach this chapter with appropriate solemnity, for it deals with death at scale, not from direct violence, though violence occurred, but from the slow grinding of logistics failure and medical collapse. The numbers remain uncertain, contested by survivors who experienced them and scholars who study them, but the pattern is undeniable. The elderly died first, disproportionately. Modern medicine had extended human lifespan dramatically through managing chronic conditions, blood pressure medication, diabetes treatment, dialysis, oxygen therapy. All of these interventions depended on continuous supply chains and electrical power. When both failed, people with manageable conditions faced unmanageable crises. The mentally ill, particularly those dependent on psychiatric medications, suffered catastrophically. Sudden withdrawal from SSRIs, antipsychotics, and mood stabilizers created medical emergencies. Some died from withdrawal symptoms. Others, their conditions unmanaged, became dangers to themselves or others. The closure of psychiatric facilities, which couldn't function without staff coordination and medical supplies, released many patients into populations unprepared to help them. Infants and young children, particularly in developing nations, died from preventable diseases. Vaccination programs collapsed entirely. Vaccines require refrigeration, supply chains, and coordinated health systems. Measles, polio, pertussis, diseases that had been nearly eradicated in many regions, returned with medieval fury. Local economies had begun to crystallize. Communities that had resources, farmland, water, fuel deposits, organized around those resources. Informal currencies emerged. In some regions, canned goods became currency. In others, ammunition. In still others, precious metals reasserted their ancient role as money. The critical insight was this: humans are extraordinarily adaptive. Given sufficient time without internet, populations developed workarounds. Messenger systems using bicycles and motorcycles connected nearby towns. Radio communication, initially hobbled by lack of replacement parts, was gradually restored as repair networks emerged. Local manufacturing, dormant for decades as global supply chains dominated, reawakened to produce essential goods. But this adaptation occurred at enormous cost. Global GDP, which had been approximately $100 trillion pre-collapse, was now estimated at $34 trillion, a 66% contraction. This was not a recession. This was not a depression. This was civilizational regression to a complexity level not seen in a century. Chapter 6. The New Order Year 1. As the first anniversary of the collapse approached, the shape of the new world had become visible. It was a world of fragments, thousands of regional economies, loosely connected by slow communication and intermittent trade, each struggling to maintain stability and self-sufficiency. The political order had transformed radically. National governments persisted, but their power had been hollowed out. They could no longer collect taxes efficiently without digital financial systems. They could no longer enforce laws across vast territories without communication systems. They could no longer project power reliably without the logistics networks that modern military operations required. Power devolved to regional and local authorities who could actually exercise control. Mayors, governors, military commanders, even corporate executives who commanded local resources. In some regions, this devolution proceeded peacefully through negotiated federalism. In others, warlordism emerged as armed groups filled the power vacuum. The line between legitimate local authority and gangsterism blurred in proportion to distance from functioning central governments. The United States fractured into approximately 14 quasi-autonomous regions, each centered on a major city or resource base, each maintaining nominal allegiance to Washington, but operating independently in practice. The federal government controlled Washington, D.C. and its immediate surroundings, but little else with real authority. The military spread across hundreds of bases, divided along regional lines. Some units stayed loyal to federal command. Others pledged allegiance to state governments. Still others became independent actors. Europe's fragmentation followed linguistic and historical fault lines. The European Union, already strained before the collapse, effectively dissolved as member states retreated into self-sufficiency. Germany split into northern and southern zones. Spain's autonomous regions became truly autonomous. The Balkans, always simmering, boiled over into renewed conflicts. Comparative analysis. The political fragmentation mirrored the collapse of the Roman Empire, not in its military defeat, but in its gradual inability to coordinate and defend its territories. Roman provinces, cut off from central authority and unable to receive support, had to provide for their own defense and governance. The process took centuries in Rome's case. In our scenario, It occurred in months because the connective tissue, digital communication, vanished completely, rather than deteriorating gradually. Year 1. Economic reconstruction. The first year also witnessed the emergence of what economists called neo-industrial economies, production systems that utilized pre-digital technology with post-digital knowledge. Engineers who remembered how pre-internet manufacturing worked became invaluable. Companies that had maintained paper records survived. Those that had gone fully digital often collapsed, their institutional knowledge trapped in inaccessible servers. Some sectors adapted faster than others. Agriculture, ironically, proved more resilient than expected. While industrial farms struggled without GPS-guided equipment and online markets, smaller farms that had maintained traditional techniques continued operating. Food production declined globally, certainly. Estimates suggested a 40% reduction in the first year. But this was less catastrophic than many had predicted. Manufacturing adapted through radical simplification. The complex global supply chains that had produced smartphones and automobiles were irretrievable. Instead, manufacturing reverted to simpler products made with locally available materials. The smartphone, that icon of the digital age, became a museum piece. New production focused on basics, tools, textiles, preserved food, medicine when possible. Currency systems stabilized around precious metals and goods with intrinsic value. Gold and silver reasserted their millennia-old role as money. In regions with strong institutional continuity, government currencies maintained some acceptance, backed now not by digital accounting, but by physical reserves and government reputation. In regions with weak governance, scrip systems and barter dominated. Year 1. The knowledge problem. Perhaps the most insidious long-term damage was informational. The internet had served as humanity's external memory, a vast repository of knowledge, accessible instantly. With that memory gone, societies faced a question. What did they still know? Libraries became invaluable. Not digital libraries, which were useless, but physical libraries with books. Universities with extensive physical collections found themselves besieged by people desperate to access technical manuals, medical references, agricultural guides. The price of technical books on the second, but many fields of knowledge had never been fully committed to print. Software engineering, cryptocurrency, modern AI development, large swaths of contemporary medicine. These existed primarily in digital form. Code repositories, research papers, technical documentation, all trapped in inaccessible servers. A generation of knowledge simply gone. Young people who had grown up with internet access faced particular challenges. Their education had assumed digital connectivity. They could Google answers, but couldn't derive them independently. They could use software, but couldn't create it without Stack Overflow and GitHub. The collapse revealed a dependency so deep, it was almost neurological. Chapter 7. The 5-year mark, years 2 to 5. The 2nd through 5th years represented a period of grinding adaptation. The initial crisis had passed. Societies had stabilized at their new equilibrium, however diminished. But the long-term implications became increasingly apparent. Global population, which had been 8.2 billion at the time of collapse, was now estimated at approximately 7.4 billion. The 800 million reduction represented not only direct deaths from the collapse and its immediate aftermath, but also a plummeting birth rate. In circumstances of scarcity and uncertainty, couples delayed or foregone having children. Healthcare systems, still barely functional, made childbirth riskier. Infant mortality rates had regressed to early 20th century levels. The economic picture remained dire but showed signs of bottoming out. Global GDP stabilized around $38 trillion, roughly 38% of pre-collapse levels. This figure masked enormous variation. Some regions had retained 60 to 70% of previous output, while others had collapsed to 20% or less. The variance correlated strongly with pre-collapse resilience factors: energy independence, food self-sufficiency, preservation of physical infrastructure and knowledge. Comparative data point. The supply chain disruption literature suggests that major disruptions cause both immediate output losses and longer-term productivity reductions as businesses adopt less efficient but more resilient practices. The New York Fed's Global Supply Chain Pressure Index, which tracked such disruptions pre-collapse, would have registered off-scale readings if it still existed. The permanent elimination of global supply chains represented not just a disruption, but a phase transition to an entirely different economic. Year 3. Regional trade networks. By the third year, regional trade networks had begun to re-emerge, though at far lower volumes and complexity than pre-collapse global trade. Ships still sailed between continents, but their cargo was dramatically different. Instead of consumer electronics and fashion, they carried grain, fuel, minerals, and manufactured goods that regions couldn't produce locally. These trade networks operated on pre-digital principles. Merchants traveled with goods, negotiated in person, and settled accounts through physical transfer of currency or goods. The transaction costs were enormous. A 19th century shipping venture might see 30 to 40% of value consumed by transportation, insurance, and intermediary costs. Modern pre-collapse trade had reduced this to 5 to 10% through digital coordination. Now those inefficiencies had returned. The irony was exquisite. International trade persisted, but it more closely resembled the trading patterns of 1850 than 2024. Clipper ships had been replaced by container ships, certainly, but the operational logic had regressed 175 years. Economic historians, had they time for such meta-analysis amid survival efforts, would have noted that the collapse had demonstrated the degree to which modern trade was built on information infrastructure rather than physical infrastructure. Year 5, the recovery attempts. Multiple attempts to restore internet connectivity occurred in these years, each failure instructive. The fundamental problem was coordination at scale. Restoring the internet required simultaneous action by thousands of entities across continents: ISPs, hardware manufacturers, backbone providers, governments, and technical specialists. Some regions succeeded in creating local networks, citywide or regional internets, connecting hundreds or thousands of users. These islanets, island networks, provided immense value to their users, enabling email, file sharing, and limited web services within their boundaries. But connecting these islands into a global network proved intractable without global coordination. And global coordination required, paradoxically, the very communication infrastructure they were trying to restore. The satellite-based restoration attempts proved particularly futile. The existing satellite infrastructure had largely failed. Satellites require constant updates and orbital adjustments, communicated digitally from ground stations. Without those updates, satellites drifted, collided, or simply ceased functioning. Launching new satellites required a functioning space program, which in turn required a functioning economy, which required digital communication. Another vicious circle. Global population had stabilized around 7.1 billion, with growth resuming slowly as societies adjusted to their new circumstances. The demographic pyramid had shifted dramatically. A bulge of middle-aged survivors, fewer elderly, many had died in the initial collapse, and a smaller cohort of young people born into the post-collapse world. This younger generation, the first to grow up entirely without internet, would prove crucial to psychological adaptation. For them, stories of instant global communication, of accessing humanity's collective knowledge through handheld devices, of maintaining relationships across continents. These were legends, no more real than tales of magic. They adapted to limitations that older generations found traumatic. A new elite had emerged. Those who controlled essential resources and possessed technical knowledge to exploit them. Engineers who could maintain power plants, doctors who retained medical knowledge, agriculturalists who could optimize crop yields, manufacturers who could produce essential goods. These people commanded positions of influence and comfort unavailable to mere former paper millionaires. Economic structure analysis. The 10-year economic structure resembled what economists call a post-industrial to industrial regression. But this framing was inadequate. The economy hadn't simply regressed to 20th century patterns. Rather, it has developed unique characteristics, utilizing some advanced knowledge, medicine, material science, engineering principles, but lacking the coordinating infrastructure, digital communication, complex supply chains, financial markets, that enabled that knowledge's full application. It was a hybrid state without historical precedent. Sophistic. Year 10. Political reorganization. The political map had been redrawn, not through formal treaties, but through practical necessity. Nation-states persisted as legal entities and identity markers, but real governance occurred at smaller scales where coordination was feasible without digital communication. The United States had effectively become a confederation of regional powers, each operating semi-autonomously while maintaining nominal federal unity. The dollar still existed and was used, but regional currencies and scrip supplemented it. Federal elections occurred, but with voting managed locally and results transmitted slowly via physical messenger networks. China, already relatively centralized with strong regional party structures, had adapted more successfully than most large nations. The Communist Party's existing hierarchical communication systems, designed partly for resilience against digital attack, proved useful in coordinating without internet. However, even China had fragmented somewhat, with coastal and interior regions operating with significant autonomy from Beijing. Europe had fractured most dramatically, splitting into dozens of city-states and regional federations. The dream of European unity, always aspirational, had proven impossible to maintain without the coordination mechanisms that had enabled it. Ironically, this fragmentation resembled Europe's pre-1945 political structure, proof that technological integration, rather than political will, had been the true foundation of modern European unity. Year 10. Cultural evolution. Culture had shifted profoundly. The collapse had revealed which aspects of pre-collapse life were essential and which were digital age luxuries. Entertainment, for instance, had reverted to local and live formats. With streaming services gone, communities organized theater, music performances, and storytelling. The quality varied wildly, but the participation was high. People created their own entertainment because there was no alternative. Education had transformed dramatically. Universities persisted, but their role had shifted from credentialing to actual knowledge transmission. Without internet job markets, the value of a degree came from actual skills learned, not signaling. Apprenticeship systems re-emerged for technical trades, learning by doing under expert guidance because video tutorials no longer existed. Religion experienced a renaissance, particularly traditional religions with strong community structures. In times of crisis, humans seek meaning and community, and religious institutions provided both. Temples, churches, and mosques became centers not just of worship, but of social organization, education, and mutual aid. The secular, individualistic culture of the digital age gave way to communal structures that could function without technology. Chapter 9. The 20-Year Reckoning, Years 11 to 20. The second decade after the collapse witnessed the emergence of what historians would call the Reconstruction period, a conscious, organized effort to rebuild technological capacity from the ground up. This was no longer crisis management or survival. This was intentional rebuilding with multi-generational timeframes. Year 15. Limited internet restoration. By year 15, several major population centers had successfully established regional internets, connecting millions of users within continental boundaries. These networks, called Continental Area Networks, or CANs, provided many internet functions within their geographic scope: email, file transfer, web browsing, and even primitive video streaming. However, these CANs remained disconnected from each other. Intercontinental internet traffic still did not exist. A user in North America could access websites posted in North America, but not Europe or Asia. This created a fragmented global information space, multiple internets rather than one unified network. The economic benefits of even partial internet restoration proved substantial. Regions with functional CANs saw GDP growth rates of 4 to 6% annually as digital coordination enabled more complex economic activity. The digital economy, which had contributed 18% of GDP pre-collapse, now contributed perhaps 4 to 5% within CAN regions, and effectively zero in regions without connectivity. The inequality between connected and unconnected regions grew, creating new sources of tension and migration pressure. Technology assessment. The CAN systems utilized a mix of technologies. Fiber optic infrastructure that had survived the collapse was repurposed. New satellite launches from recovered space programs provided some connectivity. But the fundamental architecture was simpler and more robust than pre-collapse internet. Fewer protocols, more manual routing, extensive physical backups. Speed and bandwidth were a fraction of pre-collapse levels, but reliability was prioritized over performance. Year 20. Economic stabilization. At the 20-year mark, global GDP had recovered to approximately 62 trillion, 62% of pre-collapse levels. This represented real growth and reconstruction, not merely statistical recovery. Manufacturing capacity had been rebuilt, though simplified. Agricultural productivity had improved through application of preserved knowledge. Energy systems had been restored to approximately 70% of pre-collapse capacity. However, this 62% figure masked profound changes in economic structure. The economy had fundamentally shifted from services toward production. In the pre-collapse world, services had represented 65 to 70% of GDP in advanced economies. Now, production, agriculture, manufacturing, mining comprised 50 to 55% of economic activity. The knowledge economy, which had dominated the pre-collapse world, had contracted dramatically. Global population had reached approximately 7.8 billion, still below pre-collapse levels, but growing steadily. Life expectancy, which had plummeted in the initial collapse, had partially recovered as medical systems were rebuilt, though it remained 8 to 10 years below pre-collapse averages in most regions. Family structures had shifted dramatically. The isolated nuclear families of the digital age, often geographically dispersed and digitally connected, had given way to multi-generational households and tight community networks. With travel difficult and expensive, geographic proximity mattered immensely. Extended families that had scattered across continents were now permanently separated. Local communities became kin networks. Chapter 10. The 30-Year World, years 21 to 30. The third decade witnessed the consolidation of the post-collapse world order. The question was no longer, when will we return to normal? That question had been abandoned, but rather, what permanent form will this new civilization take? Global GDP reached $71 trillion by year 30, representing 71% of pre-collapse levels. The recovery trajectory was flattening, suggesting that the economy might stabilize permanently at 70 to 80% of pre-collapse capacity, unless significant technological breakthroughs occurred. This wasn't necessarily catastrophic. The pre-collapse economy had featured enormous waste and inefficiency alongside its achievements. A more modest, more sustainable economy might prove more resilient. The political organization had crystallized into what scholars termed neo-medievalism, a system of overlapping jurisdictions and fluid allegiances, rather than hard national borders. City-states, regional powers, cultural linguistic communities, and religious organizations all exercised authority in different domains. A person might owe allegiance to their city for local governance, their region for trade regulation, their language group for cultural identity, and their religious community for social support. We thought borders were lines on maps enforced by governments. We discovered they were actually information flows maintained by digital systems. When the information stopped flowing, the borders became negotiable again. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, political scientist. Year 28. Year 25. The first intercontinental connection. Year 25 marked a historic achievement. The first stable intercontinental internet connection was established between North America and Europe. Data could now flow between the two continental networks, albeit at speeds that would have been considered laughably slow in the pre-collapse era. A high-resolution photo might take 30 minutes to transfer. Video streaming was impossible, but email worked. File sharing was feasible, and real-time text communication was available. This reconnection had profound psychological impacts, particularly for the older generation. People who had been separated from family and friends for 25 years could now communicate again, if they knew how, to find each other without centralized directories. The rediscovery of lost connections became a cultural phenomenon. Stories of tearful reunions via email, of learning about births and deaths that had occurred years ago, of slowly reconstructing social networks through painstaking queries and referrals. Economically, the intercontinental connection enabled coordination of trade that had been nearly impossible for 2 decades. Manufacturers could negotiate contracts digitally rather than through physical messenger. Financial instruments could be traded across continents again, though with settlement times measured in days rather than milliseconds. The global economy began to reintegrate, slowly and imperfectly. Year 30. Knowledge recovery. One of the most remarkable achievements of the third decade was the partial recovery of lost digital knowledge. Enormous effort had been devoted to accessing old servers and data storage systems that had been offline for decades. Some proved irretrievable. Magnetic storage media had degraded. Encryption keys were lost. Hardware was incompatible with rebuilt systems. But substantial amounts of knowledge were recovered. Medical databases, scientific papers, technical manuals, cultural works, gigabytes and then terabytes of information were extracted from digital graves and transferred to the rebuilt internet. This knowledge infusion accelerated development across multiple fields. Medical techniques that had been forgotten were relearned. Engineering solutions that had been rediscovered painfully were revealed to have existed in archived documents all along. However, this recovery also revealed how much had been permanently lost. Entire fields of knowledge that had existed only in rapidly obsolete digital formats were gone. Cloud-based services, which had stored enormous amounts of data, had been wiped clean when servers failed and backups degraded. Social media archives, representing billions of human interactions and cultural artifacts, were largely irrecoverable. Chapter 11. The 40-year reflection, years 31 to 40. 4 decades after the collapse, perspective had emerged. This was no longer lived experience for the young, but history. Events their parents and grandparents had survived. The psychological transition from tragedy to history was crucial for moving forward. Global GDP reached $78 trillion by year 40, 78% of pre-collapse levels. Population had climbed to 8.4 billion, surpassing the pre-collapse figure for the first time. These statistics seem to suggest recovery, even success. But such optimism required careful interpretation. The world of year 40 was fundamentally different from the pre-collapse world, not merely smaller. The economy was less efficient, but more resilient. Supply chains were shorter and simpler. Manufacturing was more distributed. Financial systems were less leveraged. All of these characteristics reduced total output but increased stability. The pre-collapse economy had been optimized for maximum efficiency at the cost of fragility. The post-collapse economy accepted lower efficiency in exchange for survivability. Year 35, the Great Debate. Year 35 witnessed what historians called the Great Debate, a global intellectual discussion about whether to pursue full restoration of pre-collapse technological complexity or deliberately maintain a simpler, more sustainable civilization. The restorationists argued that the collapse had been an aberration, that full technological capacity should and could be restored, that humanity deserved the wealth and convenience that digital technology enabled. They pointed to the suffering caused by regression, the millions who had died, the knowledge lost, the reduced life expectancy and material comfort. The sustainabilists argued that the pre-collapse world had been unsustainable, that the collapse had revealed dangerous dependencies, that a simpler civilization was more stable and ultimately more humane. They pointed to the environmental recovery that had occurred. Carbon emissions had plummeted. Ecosystems had begun regenerating. The climate crisis had been inadvertently addressed through forced degrowth. The debate was never formally resolved. Civilizations don't make collective decisions in that manner. But it influenced policy across regions. Some areas pursued aggressive technological development, attempting to restore pre-collapse capabilities. Others intentionally limited certain technologies, maintaining internet at regional scales, but avoiding the global integration that had proved so fragile. Philosophical reflection. The Great Debate represented a fundamental question about civilization itself. Is technological complexity an unalloyed good, worth pursuing regardless of risks? Or doth it create dependencies that make societies vulnerable to catastrophic collapse? The pre-collapse world had assumed the former. The post-collapse world was not so certain. This uncertainty, this questioning of progress itself, was perhaps the most profound cultural legacy of the collapse. Year 4, Cultural Renaissance. Paradoxically, the fourth decade witnessed a cultural flowering. With global communication restored to perhaps 30 to 40% of pre-collapse capacity, cultural exchange resumed at scales not seen in 3 decades. But the culture being exchanged was different, forged in isolation, shaped by survival, reflecting diverse regional adaptations to the collapse. Literature, music, and art from different regions revealed how differently societies had processed the trauma. North American works tended toward tragic individualism, exploring themes of isolation and adaptation. European culture showed fascination with reconstruction and social organization. Asian works, particularly Chinese and Indian, often depicted the collapse through mythological frameworks, treating it as a cyclic catastrophe in line with traditional cosmologies. This cultural diversity was itself remarkable. The pre-collapse world had featured increasing cultural homogenization, driven by global digital communication. Regional cultures had been converging toward a global monoculture, particularly among the young. The collapse had reversed this trend dramatically. 40 years of isolation had allowed distinct regional cultures to redevelop, creating global cultural diversity not seen in a century. Chapter 12. The half-century mark, year 50. 50 years after the collapse, the world had found a new equilibrium. Not a return to pre-collapse conditions, but a different civilizational configuration entirely. Global GDP stood at approximately $83 trillion, 83% of pre-collapse levels, when adjusted for inflation and population growth. By most traditional metrics, this represented substantial recovery. But traditional metrics captured only part of the story. The economy was structured differently, valuing different things, operating through different mechanisms. The digital economy, which had represented 18% of GDP pre-collapse, now comprised perhaps 8 to 10% of economic activity. Significant, but far from dominant. Manufacturing and agriculture had increased their share of economic output. Services existed, but were delivered differently, more locally, with more human interaction and less digital mediation. Global population reached 9.1 billion, higher than pre-collapse levels and growing steadily. Life expectancy had recovered to approximately 74 years globally, compared to 73 years pre-collapse. These figures suggested demographic health, though they masked regional variations. Advanced economies had recovered more quickly. Developing nations struggled more, lacking the infrastructure and knowledge base for rapid reconstruction. Other technologies had evolved differently. Manufacturing had automated extensively, but using simpler, more maintainable robots rather than complex AI systems. Transportation had electrified substantially, but with regional rather than global supply chains. Medicine had advanced in some areas, particularly surgery and pharmacology, while remaining limited in others, diagnostic imaging and genetic therapy. We thought we were building the internet. We were actually building a dependency. The difference became clear only when it broke. Inscription on the Internet Memorial, New York, year 50. Year 50, social structures. Social organization at the half-century mark reflected adaptations to post-collapse reality. Communities were tighter knit, necessarily. Survival had required cooperation, and that cooperation had been institutionalized. Extended family networks provided social insurance that government programs and market mechanisms had supplied pre-collapse. Religious and community organizations played larger roles in education, healthcare, and social support. The nuclear family, cornerstone of industrial and post-industrial society, had given way to more extended household arrangements. Multi-generational living was normative, not exceptional. Aging parents lived with adult children who provided care that institutional systems couldn't. Young adults remained home longer, contributing to household resources and learning skills before establishing independent households. Work had shifted from the office to the workshop and field. The knowledge work that had dominated pre-collapse economies, programming, financial analysis, marketing, consulting, still existed, but was far less prominent. Making things and growing things had reasserted their economic importance. The prestigious careers were engineering, medicine, skilled trades, and teaching. Professions that created tangible value and required expertise that couldn't be easily automated. Year 50, environmental legacy, Perhaps the most dramatic change was environmental. 50 years of reduced carbon emissions had stabilized atmospheric CO2 levels at approximately 420 parts per million, higher than pre-industrial levels, but no longer increasing. The climate was still warmer, but the catastrophic trajectory had been averted through forced degrowth. Ecosystems had begun recovering. Fisheries, depleted to critical levels pre-collapse, had rebounded as fishing fleets shrank. Forests had regenerated in areas where agriculture had retreated. Biodiversity, while diminished from historical levels, had stabilized and begun increasing. The Anthropocene extinction event had slowed considerably. This environmental recovery came at enormous human cost. The millions who died in the collapse, the reduced material comfort, the lost opportunities and innovations. Whether this trade-off was worthwhile remained a question without consensus. The sustainabilists argued that the collapse, terrible as it was, had prevented worse long-term catastrophe. The restorationists argued that better technologies could have achieved environmental goals without such suffering. Epilogue: Lessons from the Abyss. As the Grand Archivist of Economic History, I have attempted to chronicle these 5 decades with appropriate gravity and precision. The numbers I have cited are estimates. Economic measurement itself is an art dependent on the very systems that collapsed. But the patterns, the mechanisms, the human responses, these are documented in countless local records, personal accounts, and painstaking reconstructions. What lessons emerge from this simulation? First, that efficiency and resilience exist in tension. The pre-collapse world had optimized for the former at the expense of the latter. Just-in-time manufacturing, global supply chains, digital coordination, all created enormous wealth and convenience while building systemic fragility. When the system failed, there were no backup systems, no redundancy, no fallback positions. Second, that knowledge exists in multiple forms, and digital knowledge is paradoxically both more accessible and more fragile than traditional knowledge. A book can be read 500 years after its creation. A digital file requires compatible hardware, software, and power systems. The collapse demonstrated that committing knowledge exclusively to digital formats created a catastrophic single point of failure. Third, that human adaptability is extraordinary. Within a generation, populations adapted to circumstances that would have seemed impossibly primitive to their pre-collapse selves. This adaptability enabled survival, but also enabled acceptance of diminished conditions. The question of whether such acceptance represents resilience or resignation remains philosophically contested. Final economic assessment. The collapse represented the destruction of approximately $22 trillion in economic value in pre-collapse dollars, over 50 years, equivalent to 22 years of total US GDP. This wealth destruction exceeded the combined costs of both World Wars and the Great Depression. Yet, humanity survived, adapted, and eventually prospered at a reduced but sustainable level. Whether this outcome represents tragedy or salvation depends on one's perspective on what civilization should be. The collapse also demonstrated that many aspects of pre-collapse life that seemed essential were actually luxuries, nice to have, but not necessary for human flourishing. Did humans need to be constantly connected to global information networks? Did economic systems need to operate at millisecond speeds? Did supply chains need to span the globe for every product? The collapse answered, no. But the alternatives involve significant trade-offs. As I write this in year 50, sitting in the archive, using a computer connected to the rebuilt but limited internet, I am acutely aware that I am using the very technology whose collapse I chronicle. The irony is not lost on me, nor should it be. We rebuild what we lost because it had value, but we rebuild it differently because we learned the cost of fragility. The internet will not die. Humanity seems determined to maintain digital connectivity, having experienced both its benefits and the cost of its loss. But perhaps it will never again achieve the ubiquity, speed, and complexity that characterized the pre-collapse world. Perhaps that is wisdom. Perhaps that is merely limitation. Time, as always, will tell. They say those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. But what of those who remember a history that never occurred? We who study the collapse that did not happen become students of contingency, archivists of possibility. We learn not what was, but what could be, and in that learning, perhaps, find wisdom to prevent it. The Grand Archivist, Year 50.